Cool, I see people appearing. People
No pressure.
appearing in the virtual world. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming here today. The here that I don't know is where, into this virtual space to celebrate the fact of resonance with me. And I am so grateful to my friends for attending today and for offering their remarks. And I'm so grateful to Shannon Mattern, who will be moderating the event today. We're going to have a series of remarks and also some videos. And then we're going to have a moderated discussion. And during the discussion, attendees feel free to put questions down at the bottom bar. You'll see there's a Q&A tab, and you can ask questions there. But the chat is closed. But I'll be using the chat at certain points in order to send to everyone who's attending available documents. Some people who have remarks today, they've typed them out for accessibility. So I'll be putting those documents in the chat here and there for those of you who want to open them up and read along. So just to get going, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Shannon Mattern. Her writing and teaching focuses on media architectures and infrastructures and spatial epistemologies. She has written books about libraries, maps, and the history of urban intelligence. And she contributes a column about urban data and mediated spaces to places journal. And Shannon will be introducing everybody else.
Hey, great. Thank you, Julie. Thanks for inviting us. We're thrilled to be here to celebrate this with you. I noticed that some folks were coming in as you were giving the introductions, so I just want to repeat again that the chat is closed for participation, but Julie will be posting documents in the chat. You're welcome to post questions in the Q&A, and we'll get to those at the end. So I am going to introduce Julie, who just introduced me. So Julie, the reason we're all here today, is a musician, radio producer, and the author of The Fact of Resonance, Modernist Acoustics and Narrative Form, published by Fordham just this year, a couple months ago. She researches and teaches the history of sound reproduction and its intersections with the novel, film, art, and media, asking what practices of listening can tell us about race, gender, and the politics of form. Next presenter is not going to be with us in person. He is in a remote, inaccessible location right now, and we all kind of envy him to some degree, but Nidesh is going to be sharing a video. Nidesh Lawtoo is an assistant professor of philosophy and English at KU Leuven in Belgium, the project director of Homo Mimeticus, and the author of The Phantom of the Ego, published in 2013, Conrad's Shadow from 2016, and New Fascism from 2019, each published with Michigan State Press. Then we'll have Naomi Waltham-Smith, who works at the intersection between sound studies and modern European philosophy and deconstruction. Her second book, Shattering Biopolitics, Militant Listening, and the Sound of Life, sounds fascinating, is also forthcoming from Fordham, and she develops her interest in the role of sound and listening in the philosophical tradition. Then we have Michael B. Gillespie, whose teaching and research focus on Black visual and expressive culture. He's the co-author with Lisa Udine, of Black One Shot, and the author of Film Blackness, American Cinema and the Idea of Black Film, published by Duke in 2016, which treats Black film as a visual negotiation between film as art and the discursivity of race. Then we have Lana Lin, who's a filmmaker, artist, and writer whose creative practice concerns embodied vulnerabilities. She's the author of Freud's Jaw and Other Lost Objects, Fractured Subjectivity in the Face of Cancer, published also by Fordham in 2017. Lana and I shared a book launch party 3 years ago together when our books came out at the same time. And since 2001, she's focused on collaborative multidisciplinary research-based projects as Lin and Lamb. Then we have Carter Mathis, who's a specialist in African American literature, 20th century literature, and African diaspora studies. His first book, Imagine the Sound, Experimental African American Literature After Civil Rights, published by Minnesota in 2015, focuses on the relationship between sound and literary innovation during the 1960s and 70s. Then we have Lea Bertucci, who's a composer, performer, and sound designer whose work describes relationships between acoustic phenomena and biological resonance. In addition to her instrumental practice with woodwind instruments, she incorporates multi-channel speaker arrays, electroacoustic feedback, extended instrumental technique, and tape collage. So we're really grateful for all of you being here with us today, and I'm going to turn it back to Julie to start the discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Shannon. I'm just going to drop in the chat right now. This is to all panelists and attendees. This is a written copy of my remarks in case anyone wants to open up the document and read along. Again, thank you to Shannon for moderating and to everyone for being here. And I also want to thank the Price Lab for Digital Humanities at Penn, who's helped support this event. So I found sitting down to write these remarks to be incredibly difficult, in part because it brought back the phantom anxiety of having written a book at all. Part of what is so difficult about writing a book is that it means committing to the page what feels changing and unarrestable. The process really began for me 20 years ago when I wrote a senior thesis on imaginary music with Christoph Cox at Hampshire College. And then 15 years ago in my dissertation with Ramona Nadaf at Berkeley. Christoph and Ramona, I think you're out there somewhere. Thank you. Really universally, relations stop nowhere, Henry James once said. And the exquisite problem of the artist is eternally but to draw by a geometry of his own, the circle within which they shall happily appear to do so. Printed matter is a vibration, a series of waves. It's not made alone and the resonance is ongoing. I really want to thank my friends who've joined me here today to keep the eternal drone going. In their incredible generosity, they've responded to the words on the page. I've invited each of them here today because their art, writing, speaking, and thinking inspires me, and their support has touched this book. Precisely what we can't do right now is touch each other. And yet a book is very much so about people who touch it, resonance itself being a form of touch. And I also want to acknowledge that two of my friends whom I thank in the book and who touched it very deeply at Berkeley have recently passed away. And I wish very much that Ken Taylor and Felipe Gutierrez could be here with us to celebrate. Every word, Bakhtin says, is half someone else's. And for me, resonance brings us back to this essential fact that we often force ourselves to slough from printed matter in a pursuit of our own authorial voice. The fundamental unit of being is not one, but two. What James calls geometry, then, is also the exquisite problem of the critic and the theorist. For me, it was not a geometry at all. Writing was not a series of interconnected pictures, but a circle of voices, sounds, cadences, tones, and words of other people that wouldn't seem to stop. I wrote a book in what seemed like a continuous way across 2 decades with an ear for the relations I was hearing everywhere. These echoes would keep me up at night and had me scribbling on bits of paper in my sleep. And I just want to show you an exhibit. This is a paper plate that I found in one of my drawers that I was writing notes on. So the challenge for me then was to create a serial form for this fact of resonance. In chapter 2, I call it reading by echolocation. It is to listen for an object as being somewhere other than in its place. And I wrote that for Joseph Conrad, who is the main impetus of my study, each representational object is the halfway point toward another impression just beyond it. So the fact of writing as linear consecution comes up against resonance or registers within registers in and over time. So I'm grateful to my amazing development editor, Bud Bynack, if you're out there, and my editor at Fordham, Tom Lay, and the Idiom series editors, Paul North and Jacques Lezra, for taking a chance on this echo chamber turned book and for making a place for it. I should say though, making space. In the introduction to the book, I note the suggestiveness of the Greek word dekomai, which means to admit or to make space, but also to lend an ear to. It's part of the same semantic family as chorus, but also choreo, from which we derive choreography. Choreo is to make space, to make room for another by withdrawing. I wrote that it orients the physical and ethical boundary that constitutes the act of listening. I wanted to write a book that would follow a choric and choreographic principle, a methodology of resonance and making space. Communication takes place in a transitional space, drawing transformation, translation, transduction, and transmission into relation. Vibration and resonance are related terms. For resonance is a sympathetic vibration, and vibration is action at a distance. For Conrad, distance was at the center of his dilemma as a writer. What drew me to him was not only his sensitive ear, but the painful self-distance he experienced in writing and speaking. He was acutely aware that writing involved an unbroachable distance between his mind and itself, and mind, page, and reader. Between thought and language, speaking and listening, feeling and expression, sound and image is a distance. Throughout the book, I try to inhabit those vibrant distances in an effort to pick up on the material that's left over within them by coloniality and empire, what's left drifting in the air. Christopher Gogwilt, someone I want to thank very much if he's out there, he writes of the passage of literature, and it's a concept that can be put into conversation with Christina Sharp's seminal notion of the wake. Works, like ships, leave behind them a wake, a vibration on the surface of water. For Conrad, colonialism and imperialism involved him in a linguistic and sonic detritus. The material was conceptually inseparable from his sense of what it meant to become not only a writer, but an English writer. A Polish aristocrat who grew up in political exile and who was writing fiction in his third language, he spoke with a heavy accent. He was also learning English by overhearing it during his exploits as a merchant marine, traveling to the Malay archipelago and the Congo, two major sites of my book. I was interested in the fact that the mother of the Belgian filmmaker Chantal Akerman, who adapted Conrad's Malay fiction, was also Polish. The acoustics of narrative space often physicalize the linguistic and sonic detritus of Conrad's search for an idealized voice amongst resonance, a voice that could neither be cleansed of accent nor protected from the sadomasochistic memories of the fact of political domination. Resonance calls not for a recuperation of the past or a search for origins. It poses a simple yet challenging question, like the question that Narcissus poses to Echo, who's there? And this question to me is, what's left? That leftover sonic material, I realize, if followed in its resonance, could open up a different genealogy of modernism, one that led me sonically and anachronically to Ackerman, Du Bois, Fanon, Faulkner, artists who were each contending in their own way with the sonic and linguistic detritus of coloniality and empire. Articulating this genealogy involved a resonant practice and moving between at times contradictory bodies of thought, the one producing action in the other, the one tapping the unthought of the other. Chapter 2, for example, seeks out the resonance between Fanon and Conrad. For a writer like Fanon, the detritus of colonialism involved him in painful acts of sonic reinscription. To contend with the written and spoken voices that had injured him also meant writing them down again in an act of testimony. Each of the figures I take up involve us in the ambivalence of language, a crisis of address, and the never neutral act of resounding. Resonance became the privileged metaphor for this movement because there is something of it that is not a metaphor at all, but a fact. Resonance, like Conrad's writing itself, carries residua of things we do want as much as it carries along things that we don't want, but should contend with and face. This fact is ontological. When I say that your words resonate with me, I'm actually describing a fact. I'm saying that your words are not coming to me or even in me, but that I am part of their event. It wasn't resonance until it arrived, and I move along with it. Conrad called idioms old words worn thin, defaced by ages of careless usage. And as a non-native speaker of English, he heard in its idioms a resonant archive. The facts archived by resonance are historical and ongoing. The continued occupation of non-white territories in the Middle Passage, which, as passage, was and is the world historical vibratory event of making space. A key term throughout the book is the cut, a word I draw from a psychoanalytic lexicon. Something about the fact is painful and leaves a scar. Conceptualizing resonance, I felt as if there was a cut in each object that made it vulnerable to things outside of it, that to resonate is, in some way, to be changed and transformed. When an occluded presence returns, it resounds. It makes what has occluded it feel the weight of its return and make a space for it. Such return is a formal quality of each of the texts I take up. It's also the structure of the book, one that asks, in a manner of speaking, that the reader hear forwards and backwards. Conrad's writing was continually touched by unthought resonances. And by that same token, my writing is touched and touches it in ways unthought of by me. So in celebration of that fact of resonance, I now want to hear the voices of my friends. And now we'll turn it back to Shannon.
Okay, so I am going to queue up Nishant's video. So just give me a moment here, please.
Nidesh.
Nidesh, excuse me.
For those of you who are joining late, Nidesh isn't here right now, here, which is nowhere, but you'll find out in a moment why. One thing I want to say about Nidesh's video before you cue it up is that he's in a very special place and the soundscape is quite loud. And let me drop the his remarks here so that I just took some notes on his presentation. So that if you want to follow along with that document, please do. But you're gonna hear a loud soundscape, so it might be distracting in headphones. So I'll just end there.
Okay, so I am prepared to share the screen. Just 1 second. Okay, can you see the video? Okay.
Hello, Julie. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to participate in this virtual book launch for The Fact of Resonance. I feel I'm at 2 removes, as you can see from the setting. I'm not in front of my laptop. I don't have reception here. There is no Wi-Fi. And so I'm recording or pre-recording this introduction. And I hope I can manage to send it to you. I find myself in Switzerland, in the Swiss Alps, in the Italian-speaking part. Just a brief reminder that the Newfoundland Pass is actually not very far away from here, and Conrad made an important decision on that pass. And just behind here, Nietzsche was writing Zarathustra in Engadina. So it's the same canton. And so these are the kind of mountains that inspire my writing as well. And as Julie asked me to respond, or asked us to respond to her new and timely book, The Fact of Resonance, I thought I situated within this context. The resonances with Julie's work are at least double, in the sense that we share both a critical and a theoretical focus. The critical focus is obvious. We are both interested in Conrad, and we actually met for the first time in New York at a Conrad conference. I'm happy to see that my work on Conrad was useful to the fact of resonance and contributed to Julie's thinking about resonance. The second focus is theoretical, and my own work circles around the notion of mimesis. There is a tendency in literary studies to restrain mimesis to representation or realism. And my sense is that there is much more to say about mimesis that concerns human behavior more generally, that humans are mimetic creatures, what I call homo mimeticus. And in that sense, the notion of resonance is in many ways a mimetic concept, in the sense that resonances generate echoes that blur the boundaries between origin and copy, self and other, inside and the outside. And this is very much in line with my own understanding of mimesis. I mentioned the notion of echo because I think that the echo is the auditive counterpart of the trope of the mirror or the shadow, which is the one I used in my work on Conrad shadow. So the echo is to sound what the mirror, the shadow, is to vision, and the two are complementary. And so my remark will circulate around these two double resonances, Conrad on the one hand and echoes on the other. And I thought I'll take as a starting point the title of the second chapter of The Fact of Resonance, the echo of the object. And to mimetic theorists, the echo or the resonance is directly with the work of a French philosopher, one of the promoters of deconstruction. His name was Philippe Lacoue-Labarthe, who wrote an essay titled The Echo of the Subject, and Julie acknowledges the reference to Lacoue-Labarthe. The Echo of the Subject is a complicated essay, and I won't have time to enter into the details, but maybe an alternative starting point is a short book which is based on a conference Lacoue-Labarthe gave for children. And it was a conference titled in French, Le Chant des Muses, the Song of the Muses. I'm not sure whether this short book has been translated, but there is an interesting insight about the origins of music in this book that informs the echo of the subject. I think might resonate throughout Julie's chapter, The Echo of the Object, and it's internal to my interest in Heart of Darkness and Conrad's attention to sound, particularly drumming. Lacoue-Labarthe says that the human fascination for music is linked to an experience that occurs before birth, as the newborn is in the womb and hears the voice of the mother. According to Lacoue-Labarthe, there is an imitation of a voice that is the maternal voice, which he posits at the origins of music. And in Conrad Shadow, I added that it might not simply be the voice that it's at the origin of music, but it might also be the beating of the heart. There is this moment in Heart of Darkness where Marlowe says that he confounds the beat of the drum with the beating of his heart. And I think it's a central moment that goes quite literally to the heart of Darkness. And what I find interesting in the idea that we respond to the beating of the heart, and that music in a way reproduces that echo that still affects us, that it affects us unconsciously, and that renders us open to sound. What is interesting in this experience is that the subject is from the very beginning related to the other, so that there is a constitutive intersubjectivity at the heart of human beings. And I think this point is a fundamental point that is central to my understanding of Homo mimeticus and is equally central to the notion of resonance, as Julie theorizes it. That is, resonance is in between, it's intersubjective and ties us to others, for good and ill. And I just want to conclude my remark by saying that once we acknowledge that there is this primary intersubjective relationship to the other that is not only based on vision, but it's based on hearing and sound, then there are two paths that open with respect to possible forms of mimetic behavior. And when we read Conrad in the 21st century, and this is another point of resonance between my work and Julie's, I think it's important to read Conrad with an eye to what is happening in the present as well. In the context of the current pandemic, I think that there is another novel by Conrad that is relevant to the contemporary situation, and it's titled The Shadow Line. It's a novel about viral contagion, an epidemic, and it shows how one of the effects of contagion is that communal movements of solidarity can emerge in order to affirm together survival. And in many ways, what we have seen in the current context of COVID-19, a problematic that is indeed amplified by social, political, ideological forms of oppression, is that the Black Lives Matter movement that have emerged in the US and spread via positive form of contagion across the world emerged precisely in order to balance and counter and oppose the new fascist pathologies. So that mimesis cuts both ways, and new form of behavior can actually emerge in periods of crisis that promote communal solidarity, solidarity being one of the virtues that Conrad promoted. So in order to welcome the effect of resonance into the world, I just wanted to end by saying that we can only hope that these positive, life-affirmative movements will keep spreading contagiously and will resonate throughout the world in order to affirm communal solidarity and social justice and counter the rising shadow of new fascist movements. So these are my thoughts, and I wish you all a good discussion, and I hope that I will be able to meet you, Julie, and the other panelists in the real world soon.
Okay. So thank you from across time and space, Nidesh, for joining us. Now we're going to turn it over to Naomi. Naomi, do you happen to have any materials you want to put in the chat? No. Okay,
no, I'm afraid I'm going to speak off the cuff, partly because I wanted to say something more from the heart that I found unable to script. So Julie's book is in many ways about contact and about encounter, about touch. And since I moved back to London about 1.5 years ago, I've missed my regular contact with Julie. Our drinks and our dinners and our ice creams that we've had in Philly and in New York, the trips to the theater, the birthdays, just nattering idly after the digital humanities group met on lunchtimes on Mondays at Penn. But from the very first moment that I met Julie, sitting outside in a cafe in New York on a hot summer's day a few years ago, I knew instantly that there was something about her and something about her thinking that resonated with me, if you'll forgive me that pun. And now that I'm so far away, and not simply because of COVID, but a whole ocean away, I miss her grace, her brilliance, her heartfelt devotion and commitment to everything that she does. She is, as we like to say on the left in the UK, a real diamond. And I miss her very much. So when her book arrived, it was a great delight. Yes, I have the prop. Here you go, that I will hold tight. So when it arrived and I read it in its final form, I could hear her voice inside my head as my eyes were dancing across the page. And it made me feel very close to her, as if I was dancing with her, though no doubt without her grace. But that I could feel as the way her thought swiftly glides from one idea to another, never lingering too long, just gently grazing against different ideas, brushing against them to transform them with her touch, but without wantonly upending them. And so I was trying to think of this concept of resonance and what I would say about it in the context of these personal feelings about Julie's book. So if resonance is contact, encounter, attachment, cathexis, being with, one singularity with, up and against one another, it is also, as Julie says, distance, displacement, dissemination, drift, transfer, and transference, in the way perhaps that Hélène Cixous plays with that word and uses a form of homonymy as a way to displace psychoanalysis and to show what she calls as transférence. So I want to take these few moments that I have now, when we're all set adrift from one another, to make, as it were, a few notes about what I want to call the end of resonance, partly understood as mourning for Julie's resonance, or for the resonance between us when we met in person, but understood also in other senses, in the sense of an end or a goal as an ultimate final principle, a ground or transcendental of one kind or another. But also resonance not simply as a force that starts something, gets it going, but also that which comes or brings itself to an end, that destroys itself. And I call this force of sound in the book that will come out with Fordham next year. I call this force shatter, in order to invoke the idea of a glass. I should have had this prop with me, shouldn't I? A glass made to vibrate at its resonance frequency, that then as a result spontaneously shatters. But that risk that resonance will shatter isn't something peculiar to a particular frequency or a particular material, but an inherent risk in all sound, I've argued. But what I want to do now to arrive at that is to go back to this original sense of resonance as what is there at the end, what remains after everything else has been stripped away, and to draw attention to a few remarks in an exchange in the resonance between Jean-Luc Nancy and Jacques Derrida on this topic. So back in 2002, when they were both together, the Collège International de Philosophie in Paris, Nancy is talking about the impossibility of the call and of responsibility, the responsibility of responding to the call. And he says that if the address probably can and even must always miss its mark, if it's always destinerant, as you, Derrida, say, then there can be this whole configuration, question, demand, address, and response, only if the address has somewhere awakened the possibility of the response. And thus, if behind the response, there is something that I would want to call resonance. So for Nancy, resonance is this thing that is the condition of possibility for all sense, the thing that is in some way behind everything else, a principle that comes before and after everything else. He says that there is nothing that could not be said of every other sense that is also said of the sonorous. But he says what is special about sonority is that it is nothing but this reverberation that makes all sense happen. And then this question of the sonorous's exceptional status comes back in another time when Jacques and Jean-Luc have a debate, a text provocatively entitled Borgamy, I'm not sure exactly how I should pronounce this, which is trying to invoking the sounds of the bowels or of the intestines. And he's talking again about this question of the singular coming up against another singular. And he says, any such, making any sound, indefinitely substitutable, a simple exemplar at the heart of the unnameable, but at the same time necessarily not any one, but this one alone, the unique and inimitable example of self, Derrida in this case, or Julie. And behind Julie, Derrida, still Derrida Julie, rather than a bottomless behind. There must never be an exemplarity. The unique must begin itself again each time. The example of the inexemplifiable must bury itself in and reemerge from each uniqueness. And then this is where it comes to the sonorous question. He continues, right at the insignificance of a name in the vagaries of its assonances, and by their very coinage, is coined the absolute significance of one for itself as much as for every other. It resonates dimly. It creaks or grinds, chokes even. It's not simply something that can be heard. It hovers as if between unnameable sounds and the inimitable timbre of a voice, like the echo of one to the others, which a hiccup would suspend. This does not make itself heard, but the whole of the real resonates here. And so then what becomes the source of a debate between them is the status of this real and who is the more absolute realist. But I'll conclude then with this. This debate really comes out in another place when they're talking about the heart. And Jean-Luc has had a heart transplant and is in hospital, and Jacques goes to visit him. And he wonders just how close he can get to his friends. Could their eyes touch? Would their eyelashes touch, their eyelids touch? But then he also remarks, talking about her soul, when her soul is talking about Herzgefühl, or the feel of the heart, that even though the heart appears to be this most proximate thing to us, the thing at our very center, the thing that Julie says that the ear is at the heart of heart. But he says, even then, we must touch the heart. We can only feel the heart through the skin, through some kind of mediation, or through some kind of gap or distance or slippage. And so he says that Nancy has this little phrase, there is no the sense of touch. There is no single resonance, only something multiple in some way. But Derrida says, instead of this negation, we need a true conditional, Siliona, if there is any such thing. And so reading Julie's book, wanting so much to say that there was this one resonance, this one special resonance between us that I would wish to hold on to and never let out of my grasp, that always clasped to my heart, that I should also remember what Derrida says. And that if we must think of resonance, not as an ultimate horizon of sense or of responsibility or of being together, but we can only think of resonance if there is any. So thank you, Julie, from my heart, notwithstanding its deconstruction. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Naomi. And now we're going to turn it over to Michael.
Okay, I'm unmuted, right? Okay. So Julie, this I just have to say, I mean, it's quite an incredible book, and I'm really appreciating having read the book in this particular moment that we're in. So I mean, I'd like to talk a bit about some of the ways of what I find really kind of fabulous about the book. Most immediately, I adore the way that you engage with Fanon and Du Bois, and particularly Freud, and others as well. But those three figures in particular, it strikes me that you're doing the kind of work that I wish that people did more of, which is to not treat their thoughts and their writings as though they are ready-made, right? I think what happens too often is people take these ideas and immediately then begin to deploy them on particular objects. And you're doing a lot of work to make them, not, in some ways, adaptable and relevant and still vital for the objects that you're interested in, and in a very astute and sharp way. So thank you very much for that. So I was really struck by, in your introduction and throughout the entire book, the way your very measured and quite effective way of thinking through and with resonance of this sense, as has been mentioned, of these ideas to be touched and to feel and to listen and to attune, and particularly for me, to submit to a calibration compelled by the vibration of another. In this kind of COVID moment, I've grown incredibly open unwillingly in some ways to this kind of sounds of empty hums. And it's made me think a lot about kind of, you know, this ideas of sonic being, and the ways that you kind of, that you quite explicitly say, and I'll quote you here, resonance rather than sound more generally provides the form, content, and method of this book because it is fundamentally relational. And that for me, it was a really wonderful, inviting invitation, as is the entire book, to go through. I like the way, you know, to speak. I mean, there's the ways in which that you put, you revisit the kind of classical ways in which Fanon's work has been talked about with regard to the Freudian or Lacanian Fanon. I found the way that you argued quite rightfully for this measure of echolocation, as you say, to again quote you, echolocation will allow us to understand how Fanon, also writing of scenes of racialization in a painful oral event in the fact of blackness, reverses the Freudian schema to find in consciousness a particularly politically and historically structured event of traumatic auditory instantiation. This for me is a rather powerful and necessary and quite immediate way for us to not only to think about resonance in our everyday, the political and aesthetic manifestations of this resonance, but again, also to think about constructions of sonic being and also of sonic blackness. I want to talk a bit in particular about your reading of Du Bois, which for me was quite enlightening. The ways in which that you have compelled I'm thinking here of the latter part of that chapter, of thinking particularly in terms of the notations and the kind of gendered gestures throughout. It's quite incredible, and I found that you know, when I graduated from high school, the present that was given to me was that Library of America collection of W.E. Du Bois's writings. So I remember, you know, going through the Souls of Black Folk in that kind of intermediary period before going to college. And so it meant a lot to me to kind of see the ways that you were revisiting that entire text. I also found it quite, you know, there's a section of this chapter as well when you're discussing Du Bois, where you make the claim that, quote, when we say that a thing resonates, we say that a thing survives, yet has been transformed, that it has been made to sound out in amplifying ways, that it is no longer simply itself. And this, Du Bois begins quite far from an essential sound of an immutable source for and to which he claims belonging. He begins with a sound that is a trace in its first instance, a song that would not be were not something else violently torn away. There's an animation of Du Bois that you're doing throughout that entire chapter, of that Du Bois is not necessarily a specter of the past. We still have to reconcile with his ideas as we continue to reconcile with the entire Black radical tradition. So thank you so much for the work. Thank you so much for the invitation. And I'm quite happy to resonate with this work, to keep the pun going, of course, but thank you.
Thanks very much, Michael. And now we are going to move over to Lana. And I hate to interrupt with some kind of backstage details, but Lana, do you have the video you're supposed to queue up? Because I don't believe I have it. Julie has it. Okay.
If I'm right though, Lana, and to everyone out there, I just dropped Lana's remarks into the chat for those of you who want to follow along. And if I'm right, Lana, you'll tell us when we should turn to the video, or do you want to do it? I think I should just do it so that you don't have to worry about it. Maybe just let me know when I should turn, right? Can you hear me? I can't hear you. Can anyone hear Lana?
I think you're muted, Lana. No. Are you muted, Lana?
No. Uh-oh.
Can you hear me now?
Yay, yes.
Sorry about that. I could hear everything, and yes, it's fine if you would be kind enough to start the video.
Okay, just tell me when.
So I thank you so much, and thank you, Julie, for inviting me to speak on this occasion with such amazing co-presenters. It's really an honor to be able to speak with you all and with your book. I wrote up my comments because I'm too anxious a person to speak extemporaneously. And I wrote them with referring to Napolin, because that seemed appropriate when I'm writing with somebody. But in this occasion, here in Zoom person, I'm going to speak of Julie. But if I slip, that's why. So I wanted to take up Julie's cue to use resonance as a methodology to meditate upon the acoustic realms opened up by poet Audre Lorde's writing and the vibrations between her 1980 memoir and my 2018 film, The Cancer Journals Revisited. For the film, 27 people read Audre Lorde's The Cancer Journals aloud and reflect on its meaning for themselves personally and for the current biopolitical moment. The film can be viewed as a reparative reading of a memoir that seeks itself to repair. As Julie distills Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick in her book, to read in the reparative mode is to shore up pieces and put them back together. The 27 readers through whom we hear the Cancer Journals piece together passages from Lorde's journals that narrate the prospect and reality of cancer as it coursed through her life, integrating their own reflections on Lorde's words and the resonances her words induced. So let me home in on the concept of resonance as Napolin, or as Julie, advances it. By way of Edouard de Lissant, Julie indicates that resonance is a relation that opens up a space for touching the other, as we just heard her so eloquently describe. Resonance then, as we've been hearing from the other presenters, is fundamentally relational. Resonances take shape and shape shift between one object and another, between one voice and another, forming, in my film, resonances between the readers of Audre Lorde, vibrating between each other and between themselves and Lorde. In describing the transformational quality of literary resonance and the correlative experience of reading, Julie notes that the present resounds into and against the past. The Cancer Journals Revisited hopes to activate affective resonances modulated through the grain of the reader's voices between the present of its viewing and listening and the past of Lorde's 20th century accounting of a racist, sexist, homophobic world where medical, carceral, military, and state violences loom and rebound in our present pandemic and Black Lives Matter protests. In the Cancer Journals Revisited, I asked what Julie recalls that W.E.B. Du Bois was after in The Souls of Black Folk, as Michael just recounted. How to retrieve in the present what is still left of striving within a Black structure of feeling. For both Du Bois and Lorde, this question revolves around the idea of transformation. Transformation, Julie argues, is integral to resonance. And quote, I'm quoting Julie, is not the contact between worldly survival and transformation in sounding one way of defining resonance, she posits. When we say that a thing resonates, we say that a thing survives, yet has been transformed. Lord began her cancer journals with a lecture called The Transformation of Silence into Language and Action. For Lord's survival was contingent upon sounding, upon transforming the unsaid into spoken language enacted upon the world. So now I'd like to play, or I'd like to ask Julie to play, a 3-minute excerpt that exemplifies the transformation and amplifications of utterances and soundings in the film and gives a sense of its form and feeling.
Of what have I ever been afraid?
To question or to speak as I believed could have meant pain or death. But we all hurt in so many different ways all the time, and pain will either change or end. Death, on the other hand, is the final silence. I was going to die, if not sooner than later. Whether or not I had ever spoken myself.
My silences had not protected me. Your silence will not protect you. But for every real word spoken, for every attempt I had ever made to speak those truths for which I am still seeking, I had made contact with other women. While we examined the words to fit a world in which we all believed, bridging our differences. Within those weeks of acute fear came the knowledge. Within the war we are all waging with the forces of death, subtle and otherwise, conscious or not. I am not only a casualty. I am also a warrior.
What are the words you do not yet have?
You do not yet have.
What is it that you need to say? What are the tyrannies that you swallow day after day in an attempt to make your own, until you are sickened and die of them eventually, still in silence? Perhaps for some of you here now, I am the face of one of your fears. Because I'm a woman, because I'm Black, because I'm a lesbian, because I'm myself, a Black woman warrior poet, doing her work. Come to ask you, are you doing yours?
So Lana, I'm going to read this. Page 21. And of course I am afraid. You can hear it in my voice. Because the transformation of silence into language and action is an act of self-revelation, and that always seems fraught with danger. But my daughter, when I told her of our topic and my difficulty with it, said, "Tell them about how you're never really a whole person if you remain silent. Because there's always that little one piece of you that wants to be spoken out. And if you keep ignoring it, it gets madder and madder and hotter. And if you don't speak it out, one day it will just up and punch you in the mouth." Well, I remember that conversation. Yeah, it's great to read that. It's great to read that.
Okay, so I'll just quickly conclude of what had I ever been afraid, Lord asks. To question or speak as I believed could have meant pain or death, her daughter continues, echoing her mother's words. If, as Julie suggests, for Conrad, the unsaid is what is unheard by the colonial ear, for Lord Silence, the unsaid is what is unheard by the capitalist, corporatist, imperialist ear. What do we hear in Audre Lorde's voice? What prompted my wish to leverage her authentic voice in the film? Lorde's voice acts as a bridge, not quite in the sense that Julie discusses sound bridges in the book, but as a bridge between past and present, and in this instance, between mother and daughter. This bridge does not close upon whose voice we hear, for do we not often hear the mother, shall we say, resounding in the daughter? Mother and daughter's voices are doubled, acoustically miming double consciousness. In bridging the time of now and then, in holding the loss of the mother, recitation here is a resonant relation put to reparative work. And the collective voices in the Cancer Journals Revisited serve as vehicles for echolocation, for listening to Blackness, to the aftermath of physical trauma and racial unrest, to the acoustically displaced. Thanks. That's the end of my comments.
Thank you, Lana. So we're already hearing lots of conceptual and formal resonances, both in the visual space of the screen and the sonic qualities of what everyone is saying, and even just a content analysis of the words people are putting out into space right now. There are kind of tons of resonances that we can talk about with our remaining time. But for now, we're going to turn it over to Carter.
All right, can everyone hear me okay? Good, good. Just want to thank you all for being here. Thanks to Julie and everyone who organized the event. Very happy to be here on this panel and to have had the chance to encounter the book. Julie and I have known each other, I guess, for maybe, what, 5, 6 years, I guess? And you know, that time has been, you know, largely through the genesis, the development of this book. So I was very happy to have the chance to read it. I have prepared remarks I'm going to go into, but I just wanted to make 2 kind of broad comments first, just about the book overall. I just wanted to note that I think, you know, Julie's done something pretty, well, very admirable in that, you know, she's written this work in literary sound studies in a moment where there's a profusion of texts that are taking up these questions, and Julie's done so in a way which is kind of synthetic in conversing with those that have come before, and Julie is still at the same time breaking new ground and allowing us to see many of the concepts that have been out there in sound studies through new lenses towards new interpretations. And I also just wanted to note in a matter of form and the book's, you know, how the book is written, I really appreciate a lot, but I just wanted to make this one note that stuck out to me, which is Julie is willing, you know, to not only go into the first person, which is of course not unusual, but to actually go into the second person and kind of addressing us as readers directly. I'm thinking about a moment and talking about Du Bois's forethought, where she's, I'm not going to turn to it right now, but just Julie's kind of talking along with the text as and imagining how we're hearing and ourselves read that text. And I think that's an interesting mode of praxis that we see throughout the work. Julie being willing to kind of take these chances to do things a little more non-traditionally. So I really appreciated that. All right, so my remarks really focus on kind of the key terms of the book. So I'll just go through them now. So Julie asks us in the opening to her book, The Fact of Resonance, what is the sound of a novel? It's a deceptively straightforward sounding question in the most immediate sense of its structure, at least. But to begin approaching an answer through Julie's critical lens necessitates a rerouting or detour in and through the idea and sonic permutations of the concept of resonance. Like Julie, I also treasure the OED as a terminological, etymological ground zero starting point from which layers of critique may be created and scaffolded. And so I begin by looking for productive resonance and tension between the different yet overlapping definitions of resonance we were each drawn to. In the introduction to her book, as she lays out her key terms and argument, Julie points us toward this definition of resonance. Quote, the condition in which an oscillating or periodic force acting on an object or system has a frequency close to that of a natural vibration of the object, a resulting amplification of the natural vibration. I love Julie's OED choice here and the ways that thinking through that definition of resonance opens up so many possibilities for analyzing the potential series of complex relations between sound and text. As Julie points out, one of the compelling reasons to think through resonance as a term of orality and acoustics that can be brought to bear on text has to do with the disruption implicit in resonance of the disruption of the more traditional temporal relations in music one might expect in moments of listening, in Julie's phrasing, where the shape, quote, where the shape and substance of a physical object produces timbre. Building on this generative disruption of temporality, proximity, and linear meaning, the fact of resonance lingers in the possibilities of reverberation, echo, drift, the haunting of words, the delay of expectation, the always already sense of worlds as fragments of a whole that can only be constituted as truly whole through the diffuseness of their fragmentation. Indeed, this book is nothing short of a recasting of literary hermeneutics that moves between Jeanette's framings of the narratological horizons of mimesis and diegesis and Schoen's sense of the totality of the acousmatic. Julie's mobilization of resonance pushes us to think through the interpretive possibilities of multiple thresholds, a key term throughout the text, but most certainly the threshold between the textual and the oral. To return to the OED, I wanted to raise another definition of resonance that resounded for me after encountering Julie's rich theorizations and analyses in the fact of resonance. Because this book is so clearly immersed in relations, as has been pointed out previously in the comments, and often specifically those relations pertaining to race, in contemplating this level of the work, I found myself thinking through the following definition of resonance. The reinforcement or prolongation of sound by reflection or by the synchronous vibration of a surrounding space or neighboring object. Also, a sound or quality of sound resulting from this, unquote. This definition was helpful to me in digging deeper into the horizons Julie opens up for rethinking and rehearing white supremacy as something like the transparency, and there I'm thinking of Denise Ferreira da Silva's notion of transparency, the transparency of whiteness that is created through an ideological construction of whiteness as universal and is constantly reinforced through the long continuity of coloniality and apartheid that still sit with us. At the same time, this kind of resonance seems to offer the hope, and I think this was touched upon earlier too, the sort of double-edged possibility of resonance. So at the same time, this kind of resonance seems to offer the hope of what Glissant, who's been mentioned previously, calls opacity, a fugitive, nonlinear force of self-determination in the face of determination from without. And the right that we as non-white subjects have to claim opacity as a defensive and offensive tactic against white supremacy. On that note, in closing, I wanted to think about how Julie's work offers meditations on the capacity of literature or literary soundscapes to reverberate, resound, and resonate with racial meaning. And I'm reminded of an MLA presentation I gave that Julie actually, I think, was the chair of the panel several years ago, that explored practices of sampling in contemporary underground rap. Central to that presentation of mine was a reference to Steve Reich's 1966 tape loop composition, Come Out. For those of you who don't know about this composition, it's a 13-minute sound collage, I guess we could say, created by Reich for a benefit for the Harlem Six, a group of young Black men accused of the murder of a Hungarian immigrant during unrest in Harlem in 1964. Reich's composition is built up from a several second long clip of one of the accused, Daniel Ham, his testimony regarding the abuse he suffered at the hands of the police due to multiple beatings in the station. I had to like open the bruise up and let some of the bruised blood come out to show them. Reich distills the sample down to the looped repetition of the 5 words, come out to show them, and then using multiple loops of the sample simultaneously channeled and overlaid at different frequencies, Reich creates a richly resonant tapestry of sound that reduces the voice to something like, to a beat like phonic matter, I guess I would say. And so you can listen to this, it's widely available. And I would also just note that Brent Edwards in his recent book, Epistrophes, treats the Reich piece at some length towards the end of that book. There's much more to say about how Julie's notion of resonance might help us hear Reich's work in all of its sonic complexity. But I want to punctuate this set of issues by expanding a bit outward to wonder how we might consider the 2004 track by Mad Lib, America's Most Blunted, which features 30 seconds of a sample from Reich's Come Out, and to then think about the lines of resonance between Reich and Mad Lib, marking sonically and being marked sonically and historically over 4 decades of white supremacist police brutality, and how such resonance might help us demarcate the frequency, the constancy, the ubiquity of white supremacy moving across the temporality and soundscape of modernity. Thank you.
Thanks, Carter. And now I believe Julie is going to introduce our final presenter, Lea.
Okay, yes, I'm unmuted. My head is just swimming with everybody's remarks. I did want to introduce Lea Bertucci only because I thought it important to say that, well, she's an artist that I've admired for a long time, and I want everybody to go check out her work on Bandcamp, especially the album Resonant Field, which is incredible. And I just wanted to thank her so much for making this piece what sounds to be especially for this event. So I'm very, very thankful for that. So Lea, I'm just going to turn it over to you, and I thought you could introduce yourself, your work in the piece, and then Shannon, if you could cue the video after Lea speaks, that would be great. And I think for this piece, if people out there have headphones, it would be great to hear with headphones.
Okay, hi. Julie, I just want to thank you so much for having me as part of this panel, and it was such a really wonderful opportunity to be able to familiarize myself with your work, and congratulations on the book. It's so fulfilling to me as a practitioner of resonance to hear your sort of philosophical and relational extensions of the idea of resonance, because as somebody who works in quite a one-to-one fashion with acoustics and with sound, it's really been such a pleasure to just extend this notion of what resonance can be. And so I'm a sound artist, I'm a composer. I specialize in site-specific and site-responsive work. So I often, I like to say that trespassing is one of my hobbies. I really enjoy trespassing in places that I'm not supposed to be in order to repurpose or reclaim the space for creative purposes. And a lot of the spaces that I often find myself in, I consider to be post-industrial. So I like the idea of being able to sift through the dregs of our post-industrial society and to rethink what the possibilities of reclaiming these spaces in a creative way could be. I've also, in the process over the last month or so of participating in a lot of the protests that have been happening, it's been a really interesting opportunity also to rethink the way that public space can be reclaimed, and the way that sound can be used as a weapon within dismantling white supremacy and police brutality and stuff like that. One thing that I just want to mention, one of the most moving moments that I experienced in a protest recently was demonstrating outside of a prison in Lower Manhattan, and actually being able to, have a collective voice chanting that the people who were actually locked up could hear. And the inmates were able to like bang on the windows of the prison in time with what we were doing. So it was really interesting to create this continuity in between interior space and exterior space, in between incarceration and freedom. So, these are sort of a lot of the ways that I've been sort of rethinking and re-evaluating what my practice is and what the possibilities are in terms of relational aesthetics in what I'm doing in terms of going into resonant spaces and exploring the acoustic characteristics. One of the big things that I like to do is I'm a little obsessed with the room tone. So every acoustic space has a particular tone or series of tones that are unique to that space. And so when you play that tone, when you find what that tone is, the room has a particular kind of resonance that jumps out. You hear all these different harmonics emerge. So in the video that I'm about to show, so the video is an improvisation between myself and trombonist Chris McIntyre. And I also think that, the act of free improvisation, which, is a revolutionary African-American, modality, has also sort of plays into this idea of resonance and empathy and relational aesthetics. So what you're about to see is an improvisation where we pretty much are exploring this space, which was a military bunker constructed in World War II. And we're trying to, through the process of creative divination or improvisation, find the room tone, which eventually I think we kind of do towards the end. So yeah, I mean, just the idea of existing within this post-industrial space that was once used for militaristic purposes that now has fallen into disrepair, and then yeah, just sort of creating something new out of that, using it as an opportunity to create a relational gesture. I don't know, that's all I have to say.
Okay, so now I will play the video. Wonderful. Thank you, Leah. Thanks to everybody. So now we have not very many minutes remaining, unfortunately, but we want to open it up to see if any of the folks who presented, who shared their work with us today, would like to offer resonant comments with one another.
You know, I think I'll just begin by saying something very quickly about Leah's piece. First of all, what I loved about it as a response to the book is that it took us to this naval bunker. And so it returns us in some ways to the oceanic and imperial spaces of Conrad's writing, but in this kind of displaced, trace-like way. And I just love that idea that Conrad was kind of there as this very faint trace through this space of the navel. And at the end, when you and Chris are facing each other through that fence as a kind of threshold, what I appreciated so much about that moment is you can hear just how fragile unison is, that there are these moments when unison was being achieved both between the two of you and the room tone of the space. And then it would kind of quickly, evaporate into all of its vagaries, or to use Naomi's metaphor, the shattering. Like you could feel the space wanting to be pierced by their sound. I'll just end there, but I'm just so thankful for that piece.
Yeah, if I could just quickly respond. The choice to do it in that particular location was definitely purposeful, because a lot of what I've been thinking about lately is, post-colonial approaches to my practice. And as somebody who has benefited from the spoils of colonialism as a white American, I am super interested in ways to subvert all of that, and through the repurposing of these spaces, I think is one method of getting at that. So yeah, thank you.
Did any of our other panelists notice resonances, echoes, shatterings, choose your metaphor, with any of the other presenters' presentations? We also, with our remaining time, if you're welcome to use the Q&A, if anyone who's joining us today, watching and listening, would like to pose a question.
Go ahead, Michael. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something. I mean, in terms of Lana playing the opening to the fabulous film, The Cancer Journals Revisited. It immediately took me to a moment in Julie's book, and it's a pleasure to quote you, by the way. So it's a very particular moment when you're talking about what Du Bois's accounting of historical accounting, and he says that, and you say, Du Bois brings sociological and aesthetic acumen to the post-Reconstruction landscape, asking not how to document what is fading, but how to retrieve in the present what is still left of striving within a Black structure of feeling. And that for me resonated a great deal with what Lana shared with us, and what that film is doing, which I think is very much, again, one of the things that I adore about your book, Julie, is that it's not about some kind of process of excavation. I mean, these things are still vibrational. They are still resonating, and beyond our kind of temporal ideas of the past and the present and the future. So that was a resonance for me.
Lana, do you want to comment on that at all?
Sure. Can you hear me? I'm having issues. Thank you, Michael, for that remark. And it was really actually stunning to me to read The Fact of Resonance after having made the film, and to feel so many resonances between the film and what Julie was writing about Du Bois, and between Du Bois and Lord, which I hadn't heard previously. And that was really remarkable. So thank you. And I was thinking a little bit about what Carter raised, which was, again, I noted that in the book, but for you to underscore this use of the you, you know, because clearly we are struck immediately if a book is written in first person, but yes, it is very particular kind of risk taking to address the reader, address the you, and to make them complicit in the process of the reading and of speaking. And this is something I really feel that Lord does, and is extremely attentive to, is to not just bring text into her first person, but to address that. Are you doing your work? Are you doing, you know, the work that you need to be doing? So she's in that same kind of loop, making the reader, the receiver, complicit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking about how, you know, one of the tactics of your film to have it's a citation and a recitation, and the citation comes from one single source, but then it's divided between all of these different voices and these different bodies. So it's sort of like the I of each statement maps onto the person uttering it, but then also doesn't map onto the person uttering it. And in that gap, other kinds of resonances happen. I love that moment when the title comes up and you say, I am a queer Asian artist filmmaker making this work partly in response to Audre Lorde's call to action. So even there's that I that's interrupting, but also is unstable to some extent.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, please.
Cool. It's interesting to hear you share those reflections, Julie. And I just wanted to thank everyone for your super generous and on point, sharp comments. Listening to you there, Julie, I was just reminded of how much the book is a meditation. It's a meditation on so many things simultaneously, but those comments were bringing me back to the fact of how much I was struck that you're meditating on subjectivity in relationship to sound, and it's happening both in the form, like the practice of your writing, as well as the analysis. And I think that, you know, Fanon makes so much sense because as a focus, because I think he was doing that too in his writing, like staging sort of set pieces, and very interested in like processes of narration and thinking about subjectivity. And you do that frequently, often with using different persons, whether it's the second person or the first person plural, the we. Sorry about those texts. And positioning bodies and sound in the moment, how things are being heard. I'm remembering this in one of the meditations on Conrad. You're talking about Achebe reading Conrad, and then thinking about like that process of how Achebe is hearing Conrad, how we're hearing Achebe. And it's very, I just appreciated the care that you would take in those moments to sort of position things, position bodies and sounds, in these moments, so we can, theorize along with you as they are occurring.
Would you like to offer any thoughts, Naomi?
I wanted to say something that relates to a question that I saw we had in the Q&A, and also to Nidesh's very evocative video. It kind of reminded me of where I wish I actually was right now, up in the Alps somewhere, and in a very familiar sounding kind of soundscape. But the question in the chat was about Stimmung and attunement. And obviously, like, Stimmung in German is this really interesting word that both has this, the Stimme, the voice, but also has this sense highly developed by Heidegger of something more atmospheric or ambient in terms of its attunement. And the thing I suppose I wanted to raise was the kind of degree of drift that resonance might have to cross over into sort of non-human lives in some ways. And this is something that's really foregrounded, of course, by Nadesh's video, in which she threatens to be drowned out by non-human sounds, where the Stimmung, you know, created by that broader attunement to the world around him, threatens his own Stimme in some way. And so maybe this is also a way to connect it with the post-colonial question also, but maybe also directly to issues of cosmopolitics, or just to kind of the eco in echo, to kind of play with the way in which you are bracketing out parts of words with that ear and heart, Julie, but here to have echo and echo.
I'll just respond to that very quickly. Yeah, I think it comes back to this idea of a return, in a way, where the thing that's been left over from a certain kind of structure of domination threatens to overtake or return. And then taking that back to Carter's point, I'm just so happy to hear that I induced any sort of experience in the reader at all. And there was this way in which I so wish that I could overcome the distance of the page in order to be thinking along with someone in person. And so much of the book is kind of struggling with the fact of that unbroachable distance. And then what are the kinds of productive resonances that happen when you don't know who you're writing to and you're imagining them at the same time. I don't know if that links up with Naomi's comment at all, but those are the two things I was thinking about. Any other comments?
I'd just also like to say that I, as everyone has, as most of the folks on the panel have commented, how kind of artfully and thoughtfully the book is constructed as a formal object, both in terms of literary form and then just the incorporation of images. There's so many levels on which it is kind of a formally arresting object. And I think that generosity, that creating space that you attempt to do in the book, also is happening in this event here. Just the generosity with the way you organized. It's your book party, essentially, but you've used it to make space for other people to talk about resonances between their work and yours. So I just wanted to comment on how nicely I thought this very space we're kind of clearing for one another today is a nice sonic and live reflection of those connections that you are making in the book as well.
I saw that Fred Solinger is in the chat, and he was saying hi both to me and also to Carter, with whom he worked at Rutgers. And he was wondering what I'm working on next. To go to Shannon's point, one of the reasons I brought everybody together today is that these are the people who are really everyone who's here right now is really present with me and thinking about the next project. And I've been thinking about a project that's loosely or tentatively titled The Missing Image, and thinking about the kinds of sonic experiences that arise when images have been blocked or disappeared. What are the kinds of sounds and modes of listening that take their place? And I know that Lana is very interested in this in her own documentary practice, when she's attempted to document at borders where, that are heavily surveilled and where actually cameras aren't allowed, how do you document something when your very mode of documentation is not allowed? And then thinking about Lea's work of trespass and transgression, you know, trying to grab a sonic fragment from this place that you've been barred from to some extent. So that's just to answer your question, Fred. I see another question. Should I bring it up, or does anyone have? Carter, did you want to say something?
Yeah, it was just, I guess, pretty basic question, and I may have overlooked it in the book, but I was curious if you thought about the concept of feedback in relationship to resonance at all when you were writing this, and like kind of differentiating or seeing a relationship between the concepts that was instructive at all. Or I was just curious about that. I don't know why it was triggered, but something triggered it in listening to the different presentations today. So just a question.
I mean, it wasn't at the fore of my mind, but it is definitely in my mind as a musician and as an electric guitarist in particular. And there's something about feedback that what's so powerful about it is the way it's difficult to control. I mean, obviously a really gifted guitar player, I'm thinking of, you know, Jimi Hendrix obviously is what he can control the feedback, and that's part of what makes him so powerful as a guitar player, is he seems to be able to open it up and then close it down. And someone like me who's not as experienced, it opens up and then suddenly the feedback is attacking me and I don't know how to control it. So I think that that kind of corresponds roughly with the way I think about echo in the book. I think about echo as that kind of slapback, meaning that there's something a little bit more aggressive about it, that the return is threatening to some extent. And that, you know, you're not sure you want it there and it comes back anyways. And I think of feedback as having that kind of charge of attack and taking over. That's only my associations with it. I think, you know, another kind of musician might have really different associations. I'm thinking too of the role of feedback, say in all kinds of dub and reggae and, you know, to create these echo chambers. I saw that in the Q&A, my friend Ben Lempert, hi Ben, who was so helpful and read a lot of this book while I was writing it. He had a question for Lea. He said, I loved how both players would bend pitches up and down to increase and decrease the presence of the sine waves that indicate being out of tune. And he wondered if there's a kind of literary equivalent to that phenomenon. Might some resonances between texts be made more audible because the text's overtones don't tune so nicely with one another? Is it one way to think about my book as making more or less audible the frictions between texts as they come in and out of consonants? I need to think about that for a second. Does that inspire any remarks?
I guess, you know, microtonality, I think, is a very powerful thing, because, you know, as Westerners, we have a certain idea of like what notes sound good together or not. And so when you use a microtonal approach, where it's really about like slight variations in between a pitch and the sort of difference tones that emerge between those pitches, I think that it's actually like a pretty radical gesture to rethink what we see as complementary or not, what is consonant or dissonant. And in non-Western cultures, there's all sorts of different notions of what is in tune or out of tune. So, I mean, I think that this can certainly be applied to a literary context through, you know, comparing what types of words are used and how they're used, like the context of that, and the slight variations in between you know, a reader's response to a certain question, because a word has all these different associations depending on who you are and where you come from, right? So I think that that idea can also be applied musically, in terms of the listener or reader's identity and how something falls on them. If that makes any sense? I don't know.
It makes a lot of sense to me. Does anyone else have any thoughts? It actually kind of lines up with another question that's in the Q&A. Jeremy Lowenthal asks, he picks up on Nidesh's video and about the blurring of the distinction between self and other. And he asks, how can art engender this blurring of self and other boundaries without engaging in or encouraging problematic forms of identification like vicarious trauma? I'm thinking, for example, of a conversation I've been having with Naomi for something that we're working on together, but also my friend David Copenhaver, who I see is attending today. You know, I'm thinking about something like in the Black Lives Matter protests, one of the chants that's been taken up is I can't breathe. And I've, when I'm in the protests, I found myself holding back from saying that, reciting that chant, going back to Lana's thinking of recitation, because, well, the I there, I can breathe, and it's not the utterance. I can say it as a citation, but not as a statement. And the dissonance is just too great between, you know, between the citation and my fantasy of what it might mean for me to utter that in another kind of context. So I think that's a very important point to make, is that resonance doesn't mean the same. It doesn't mean identification. There's a blurring or a sharing, but there are other kinds of very violent effects, which Jeremy calls vicarious trauma. So I just want to put that out there as I think also something that Lana is playing within her film, and that I also hear in Lea's performance of that kind of, these two waves, these two voices kind of in a dance with each other.
If I could just say something quickly about that, is that the video that I shared, I actually consider it a trio performance, because there's me, there's the trombonist, and then there's the resonance of the space, which has just as much filtering, it has just as much impact on what we play as what each other plays. So I like to use this term meta instrument to talk about this. It's like a third instrument that's created from you know, the source of the sound, but then also its relevance to the space, the way that the space filters the sound. So I think that that is also a way to get at this idea of resonance and of, I guess, empathy, and creating something that is from you, but also exists outside of yourself, which is an idea that I think is very powerful at this moment, and that I really love. Yeah.
I think it's not insignificant that we can hear each person's room tone or the specific kind of whatever HVAC system is in your space as you turn your sound on. And it's also the space between us. A lot of you are working with electroacoustics. The connection itself can cause glitches and crackles, etc., that actually adds to the instrumentation of this entire kind of distributed event too. So that's also a space that produces the sound.
And Julie, I was also just going to say to you that everything you so beautifully say about the cut in your book suggests actually that what you're feeling in extremis about being unable to articulate, I can't breathe, and say it as if you were identifying, that impossibility of identification is kind of there, you know, is there in any attempt to sort of say I, right? And that's what you so brilliantly bring out. And I almost wonder, sometimes I've wondered in the situation of a chant at a protest, whether what one shares and kind of distributes sonically is actually this kind of impossibility, this failure of recognition, the fact that recognition is always cut through by unequal distribution, and therefore is never sort of curable or repairable purely at the level of identification and recognition, because the inequality cuts so much deeper. And that it is so particularly apt to say of contemporary forms of capital that inequality cuts right down to the level of the subject. You know, the more we're enjoined to be ourselves, be our authentic selves, in order to generate more surplus profit and so on, the more acutely, in fact, we experience that impossible cut. And I actually find it I found it both moving and anxiety inducing, the way in which that phrase has translated and been transducted all around the world, and what it means to be appropriated in temporarily, but with this impossibility of appropriation at every moment. I can understand both wanting not to say it, but also this tremendous urge to want to say it in a huge crowd, and to utter that at the same time, and sort of collectively experience the gap that is there.
Someone I think about quite a bit in this way is Saidiya Hartman, and her book Scenes of Subjection, when she talks about fungibility, and a very galvanizing moment for her in this book early on is thinking about the various forms of white sentiment that arise when witnessing something violent taking place, a spectacle, you know, a slave being beaten in the 19th century. And she lingers on this abolitionist sentiment who says to himself, oh my God, what if that were me? What if that were my daughter, my family? And she talks about it as fungibility, as that kind of putting yourself in the place of the other in order to imagine the torment. And so it's actually just a kind of auto-affection. It's actually just a feeling for oneself. So I think that in the book, I try to be very careful to preserve a kind of anti-identificatory, if that's a word, stance, and to resist that temptation of fungibility. That can happen, say, I think in Lana's film, you know, where you have the voice moving between different bodies. I think Lana's aesthetic is one that absolutely resists fungibility.
Well, yeah, I would just say I think your kind of mobilization of resonance very much takes on that sort of tendency towards imagining that kind of fungibility is possible in some sort of linear fashion, or it's a kind of a critique of the effort to seek that kind of linear, you know, transmission or seeming transmission of something like empathy or being in the place of another. And resonance seems to work very much on another register than that.
I mean, just that it's so much about displacement, right? I mean, you do touch on this question of contagion that is so central in Nidesh's work, and that he links very much to neo-fascism. But I think, what you do is show that every time one might take the place of another, which we all, rightly or wrongly, presumptively or for our own enjoyment or whatever, still tend to do. But that each time that happens, it is also a displacement. So you cannot take it as yourself. That becomes kind of structurally impossible. And yes, that's a very beautiful passage, by the way, in the Hartman. I've been reading that very closely for something else. So thank you for mentioning that. I think your work has this beautiful way of dealing with these problems.
There's more questions in the Q&A, but I'm mindful that we're getting close to 2 hours. Deborah Ray Cohen's asking about disability studies and the ramifications of radio as a blind, historically termed blind medium. I would love to take that up. It seems like a big question. Does anyone else have any other final remarks?
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you for this important work, and it's really been a pleasure to experience it, and I hope that it goes really far in terms of reaching people, and yeah.
Yes, thanks and congratulations, and looking forward to what's come next.
I echo the sentiments.
I feel like I'm just sitting here like, yes, tell me. Well, gosh, I don't know what to say. I would love to take up all of these questions in the Q&A. Maybe there's a way that I could email people and be in discussion with you. I see a lot of my friends popping up. But just thank you so much to Lana, Lea, Shannon, Carter, Naomi, Michael, Nidesh, and to everyone who has touched this book. I tried to get everybody into my acknowledgements, and it just kept going on and on. I just feel that I've been uplifted by so many people and who've helped me along the way. And this today was such a gift. So thank you during, very difficult times. So thanks. And I hope we have a chance to see each other in IRL soon. So I guess I'll just go ahead and end this and say thank you. And I'm sure that I'll talk to people later. Oh, and if you're just tuning in, if you use the discount code Resonance30 on the Fordham website, you can use that to get the book until August 31st, Resonance30. Tom Lay, my editor, don't kill me for giving out the discount code to everyone. Not that many people. Okay, bye everybody.
Congratulations, thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.